Okay, I'm going to call to session the work. Call to order the work session.
It's been a long 2 days.
Yeah, we want it as big as possible so everybody gets the opportunity to see the budget information. I bet you're all so excited. Let's see if I can bludgeon another audience into submission. You're a little quick on
It'll be your last one.
And at the end, I'll have a big grin on my face because this will be the last Kevin Scott budget person.
Wait, this is the last one?
Yeah.
Oh, I was not emotionally prepared.
I'm sorry. Oh, gosh. Okay. So we're going to dive into the budget 2024 presentation. It's a nice work session. Let's see if I can operate that. Okay. For veteran board members, you've seen this before. The state prescribes the forms that we use. It's all online. There are separate forms for expenditures, the revenues, and several other things. The budget is an 18-month look. They're looking at July through December of this year, as well as the 12 months of 2024, the coming year. We still have to advertise, but it's interesting. For years, we had to advertise in 2 newspapers. That's no longer the case. We don't have to advertise in the newspaper. We're online through Gateway, and then there's other online submission things that we have to do, including the CPF plan pages that we're required to post are on our website already, as well as the bus replacement plan. So those 2 items every year are under the business department on the Elkhart website. So advertising is online. We're required to hold a public hearing. That'll occur in 2 weeks where we it'll just be brief. It'll allow the public an opportunity to speak if they so choose. If they don't, then we'll return to the regular meeting and move on. That's just 2 weeks from tonight. And then we have to adopt prior to the November 1st deadline. That's a state deadline. The Department of Local Government Finance then steps in and takes what we submit. And they really are the piece of the budget that determines what we get. They will review it. They'll modify it, tweak it, and reduce it here and there, and then set the final tax rates based on our assessed valuation for the district, and they'll deliver the budget order to us. Because we're going to do borrowing at the end of the year, it will actually be a little later, but it has been happening mid-December, which would be when we get a budget order for the coming calendar year. This flow chart just gives you a sense of all the pieces that we have to put together to make this work. Form 1 on the upper left-hand corner is all of the expenditures for the funds that we have to budget. Form 2 is the revenue side of those same funds. On the lower left-hand side, the current year financial worksheet is a representation of what we spent in the January to June timeframe, the first half of this year, as well as where our cash balance is and what budget appropriation is left for the remainder of the year. You can see at the bottom, there's a couple different pieces that relate to the debt that we have. That all feeds into Form 4Bs. What those are just revenue and expense by fund. There's a separate form for each fund. That all feeds into Form 3, which is the summary form. That's the piece that we advertise. So when I post that, and I'll do that tomorrow, then our budget that we're presenting will be public facing on the state's website. And then Form 4, when we come back and approve the budget, that's the form that also is a recap of all the funds and that the board signs once approved. Okay. Timeline, we shared this, I shared this a couple months ago. Here's kind of general steps. The the DOE budget workshop, which is always at the end of June. The day after the workshop, they make the funding formula available online so we can start tinkering with assumptions. We're at the midpoint here, having the work session, reviewing all the funds. We will advertise by this Friday. Public hearing again is in 2 weeks, and 2 weeks after that, we'll be back to ask the board to adopt the budget. And then, interesting, just like the newspaper, we used to submit a pile of papers and information physically. Now it's all electronic. We load everything online so that the state, the DLGF field rep can see it. So here's the funds I'm talking about tonight. Education fund, which is the heartbeat fund, as I like to call it, for the district. It's our largest fund. And then next biggest fund is operations, and that's because they combined a number of years ago several funds that have been separate. That will be followed by a discussion on debt funds. There's 3 debt funds for us. And then the referendum operating fund, we still have cash balance, and so we budget so we can expend some of those dollars. And then finally, rainy day fund. I take a conservative approach to develop the budget. I seek maximum spending authority, because really it's not our budget. The thing we can control is debt, but the state is going to work and deliver the budget order to us. So we take this conservative approach. With education fund, there's no local tax revenue, and there's a number of uncertainties when I start into the budget work in the summer. We don't know what enrollment's going to do in the fall. Well, we're going to know next Monday. That's the official count date. We project year-end cash balances. We have ongoing staff challenges. And then the big piece, too, is state funding. What's that going to look like for fiscal year 2025? Remember, we budget on a calendar year, but the state's budget is on a fiscal year, July to June. Okay, so the funding we're getting right now per student is for July of this year, 23, through June of 24. In July of 2024, then the fiscal year 25 will start. The second year in the state budget, funding for public education went up some, but not as much as it did this year. So that would be a challenge. I'm going to turn to funding for the education fund. Again, no property tax rate. State tuition support, say that fast 3 times, is the primary funding source. And I've listed the components for state tuition. Several are the same, a couple are new. The basic grant is the lion's share of this. The state rolled in the complexity grant piece in 2020. It's still in the funding formula that I can see online, but the dollars are rolled into the basic grant. New this year, the APG, Academic Performance Grant, used to be strictly honors related. They would pay us based on the number of honors diplomas achieved for students. That includes other components. The state has not populated those yet, as I look online. Those were things like College Core 30 and advanced placement. How many students are taking advanced placement? Have any students achieved their associate's degree? And I think the last piece is mid-year graduates. There is a funding component tied to that. But the state will work those and pick the funding that's appropriate for our school district. The only thing they've populated so far is the honors diplomas. So there is a number out there, but it looks like prior years. The next 2, special education and career and technical ed, those grant pieces remain the same. The funding has changed somewhat for those, but they still exist as a component. And the final new thing, the NASP grant, non-English speaking grant, used to be historically it's been a separate grant. For some reason, they rolled it into the state basic grant. Again, the state has not populated that. So I don't know if it's going to go up, go down, stay the same. I believe it was about $780,000 the last grant cycle that was separate. So we'll see where that comes in. That's an area of concern for me. Another funding piece that comes into the education fund is summer school reimbursement. We just sent our request in. And then interest income, that is a big piece. Because our interest income is tied to the federal funds rate, which has grown tremendously. For years, it was so small, we saw very little dollars. This year, January through August, year to date, we're almost 1.2 million interest income. So that has been a very big positive that helps offset some of the funding challenges we're having elsewhere. In terms of what funding looks like per student, again, 2 count days. The first count day moved from mid-September to next Monday. Second count day will come along in February. And so in general, and this is true statewide, the second count day always goes down. There's mid-year graduates, there's other things that occur, and so you generally have less students in February, and so your funding in the January to June timeframe will shrink a little. The good news on this slide is the foundation amount. You see rose from 6,235 to 6,590. That's about 5.5%. The bad news is complexity index went down. You see it went from 935 to 866. That's about $750,000 revenue shrink to us related to that. That is tied to students that are direct certified by the state for meal assistance and that type of thing.
And how much did we gain with the foundation amount going up?
If our enrollment stayed flat, that number's north of 2 million, but our enrollment has shrunk a little bit.
Thank you.
Well,
Do we have estimates on where we are enrollment-wise?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Do we have estimates on where we are enrollment-wise at this point?
Yes, we're right around 10,800 students. Maybe just a couple more, but we haven't got to the point where when they finalize that number, then we'll start dealing with conflicts. If we claim somebody and Goshen Schools claim somebody, then the schools have to come to agreement who gets to claim them, type of thing. So, okay, but the budget materials in your book, that section that's education fund, are at a program and object level. Those are portions of the account number. But in our accounting software, when we load this for next year, it'll be at a building level. That's a federal requirement under the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. Once again, we're dealing with account number changes required by the Department of Ed. This is driven by Indiana legislative changes. In recent years, the teacher compensation report came out. The legislature said, okay, there's a 45% rule. You need to spend at least 45% of your basic tuition support on full-time teachers. And a lot of districts grumbled, well, that doesn't include all those dollars we pay for Social Security and retirement, and if you have VIVA plans and any other things that you contribute to. And so they did a survey, and we had to provide a lot of information at year end this last year. And they said, well, benefits are about 17% statewide. So they moved the threshold from 45 to 62, but it also required us to add a number of accounts related to benefits so that the state could track it. So new accounts that are in your detail, like dental is separate, LTD is separate. The only thing that combined was we no longer had to track Social Security, the FICA, separately between classified and certified. So it's condensed to one. That's why you'll see a new line that didn't have a 23 budget, but it's got dollars, and then below it'll be there was dollars last year in 23, but no dollars in 24. So this some account changes as we have to structure the way the state's asking us. Again, conservative in asking for maximum spending authority. And you've heard me, the veterans have heard me talk about the guardrail approach. I look at the current year budget, account by account, and then look at the 12-month actual expense to see how we're tracking. Because you plan in the summer, you adopt in early fall, but by the time you get into the next year, your spending pattern may have changed. And so this is how it adapts year to year. So looking at that 12-month actual. In terms of summer school, we plan for a similar program in 24 as we had in 23. A couple of the things that are driving change in the education fund, there's increased sub-costs, as well as contracted services. And I know I get questions occasionally about those, particularly expensive with speech language pathologists that we can't find and we contract out for. And now we, I think on tonight's claims, there's a bill for 6 RNs, right? So, because we're struggling. So I know there's discussions about how do we restructure and look at it differently so we can save some money there. But in terms of the budget, I have additional dollars because of how we've been tracking. Yes, sir?
Can you put some dialogue around the decrease in paraprofessionals for the elementary level and the increase with the technical assistants?
That is driven by actual spending pattern, our 12-month actual. So it's changed, that ratio has changed since last year when I was putting the budget together. Okay. In terms of what kind of expenses are in the education fund, salaries and wages for teachers, classroom paras, building administrators are the primary cost. You can see the various benefits listed there. And then instructional supplies is the other piece. And then graphically, as you look at this chart, the blue is salary and wages, the red's benefits. So you can see what a big piece salary, wages, and benefits are. We're north of 90%. Mr. Mao can speak to the history of, the state will tell you to be cautious when you're in that range. I'm going to move on to the operations fund. This fund, in essence, is for expenses that aren't directly tied to instruction. The fund components, again, are pieces that used to be separate. Capital projects is a part of this. Transportation operating accounts are part of this. Bus replacement is a piece of this. And then former general fund accounts, the largest of which is custodial. Custodial wages and benefits and custodial supplies is the biggest piece, but it also includes things that the state considers overhead, the school board expense, superintendent's office, HR, business support. So those are the 4 components that we'll get into. The full tax cap impact now falls on the operations fund. When all those funds were separate previously, the tax cap revenue loss would fall on them proportionally. So capital projects was the biggest fund, and it would suffer the worst loss. But now it's in one place. The other piece that we lose funding is related to pension debt neutrality, and it's only the property tax portion of the pension debt. Meaning, we saw pension debt payments of around $3 million. The property tax portion that will fund us on is about $2.5 million. And so we have to neutralize, in other words, neutral to the tax rate, take that amount from operations fund. And that will exist until the pension debt is extinguished. Okay, and I'll touch on that in a little bit as well. I see you guys are all excited about this. 2 revenue streams for operations fund then. Those previously separate funds all receive property tax dollars. And along with that comes excise, commercial excise, and financial institution tax. The tax rate is impacted by the state growth quotient. Assessed valuation multiplied by the tax rate drives what the revenue is for those pieces of the fund. The 4th piece, that non-instructional former general fund item, is funded by revenue transfer. That began in calendar year 2019 by legislation when they eliminated the general fund and combined funds into the operation fund and created the education fund. So, and then about 4 months into that, they came out and said, schools should not transfer more than 15% of your state basic grant from education to operations. We have consistently been running in the 12 to 13% range. I just this last week got a confirmation from the state. They send school districts and tell you what your percent is. It was 13.01. So, so we've been nicely under that number. We've not been on the naughty list. Okay. A little more on influences to revenue for the operations fund. So how big has the tax cap hit been? Since I've been here, it's been in this range between $3.6 million and $3.9 million. And the pension debt neutrality piece that I just spoke about is about $2.5 million. So you can see that we lose north of $6 million that otherwise would have been allowed for us to take care of our buildings and so forth. The minimum levy growth quotient, this inflation factor that the state has used for years, it's based on a 6-year rolling average. For 2024, it would have calculated at 5.1%, I believe. But the General Assembly this year was worried about the strong growth in assessed valuation, what that was doing to property tax bills for homeowners. And so they did implement several pieces of legislation, but one was to cap the growth quotient. So it's at 4% for 2024. And that will have a lingering effect in the years to come, because if you're looking at a graph, it's lowered the line on the graph going forward for years to come. And then schools can do levy appeals. We did one last year, and I was very proud that we received it. They approved it. It was almost $1.2 million. That was a permanent adjustment to the amount that we can use for revenue in the operations fund. That was all related to the dramatic increase in the price of buses and increased price of fuel at that time. Okay, I'm going to move on to capital projects. You see the proposed budget amount. The state requires a 3-year plan. However, they don't require us to post that online. We do have a 3-year plan that's in your budget book. It shows you building by building. Utilities come from CPF, Capital Projects Plan. You see the pieces for technology and professional services. As I like to point out each year, so there is a line for every building for building services to use. So if Mr. Scott is the building principal at Eastwood, and there's sidewalks breaking up out in front, and there's a trip hazard, or maybe the bathroom stalls need improvement, there's a line for building services to come and repair those. And so that gives a way for us to continue to try to keep on top of those pressing needs. And then we also list on those pages building improvement projects that are more expensive. This year, several buildings have parking lot renovations on their pages, as well as the high school's focus is they'd like to renovate the small auditorium. So depending on how the DLGF budget order comes back and what things we have to trim, hopefully those things will stay within the budget. And here's just this page, and the next page are pieces of the capital projects plan that we had to post on our website. Okay. Moving on to transportation operating fund, piece of the operating fund. You can see the budget there, a little over $10 million. That's an all-in cost. Expenses to operate the vehicles, maintain the vehicles, pay for staff, and take care of the insurance. And the fuel budget is a large piece of the total transportation operating budget. And bus replacement. This year's 2024 plan reflects a replacement of 12 buses. That includes all 3 types of buses that we run: conventional buses, the the longer transit buses, the 84 passenger, as well as conventional buses with wheelchair lifts. And on the next page, you'll be able to see, based on the prices of those buses, what those look like. Bus replacement advertisement requirement is 5 years. We still build a full replacement plan. So we have a plan for all of our buses and when it's time to replace them. And we continue to evaluate the fleet size. Here again, this slide is on our website. It shows the 12 buses that we plan to trade in. The numbers are even small from the podium here, but the highest priced item, the ones that are a type D, those are the transit buses. And then the higher price Cs are the lift buses. Okay. And then the final piece that goes into operations fund is this non-instructional. And you can see the account groups that are included. Again, custodial is the largest, plant operations and maintenance, custodial supplies, and the other groups. The insurance on the bottom is the liability and our various coverages for the district. And the next slide then is a recap to give you a sense of how much is the advertised 2024 budget changing from 2023. And again, 2023 was the adopted, but it's not the number that we got back from the state. Okay, this is just what we advertise year to year. And then, okay, that did something weird, Jake. All of my descriptors and numbers were on the outside of the. He converted this from PowerPoint to Google, so that's a little. But anyway, so if I can't hardly read it. The blue is capital projects. Purple is the non-instructional piece, transportation, and then the light green is the bus replacement. So you can see the relation between them. Okay. Referendum operating fund. Again, there's no tax rate 24. The operating referendum expired. However, we have cash balance. And in order to spend that, you have to gain state approval for appropriation. This year, the budget has changed significantly for operating referendum. Funds no longer includes transportation staff. That's moved back to the transportation operating piece. What does still exist in here is the TAP transfer, the Teenage Parent Program. It normally come from historically general fund and then education fund. When COVID happened, because we tried to help education fund, we moved the transfer to the referendum fund. And then along with COVID is we put the water coolers that you see there's one out here in our hall, throughout the district for a safer alternative for students and staff. There's a cost to that, just under $50,000 a year. And so that is budgeted in here, as well as currently funded, grant funded positions, as we talked about what happens with some of the ESSER positions. This certainly gives the district flexibility because with the cash balance that exists, we have time to make decisions about are we keeping those positions, do those positions fade, so that's a significant piece of the $1 million budget. Moving on to debt service. 3 funds, as I mentioned earlier. Debt service is the largest, it's $14 million. That's where the payments for all of our first mortgage bonds and soon to be general obligation bonds that we're going to do later this year come from, as well as the common school and the school technology advancement loans that Jason Inman brings to you. Those pieces, common school and the STAA, are 4-year repayment cycles. We match those with the life cycle of the devices, the one-to-one devices for students, and other technology that we apply with this. In 2024, we make the last payment or we've made the last payment for Roosevelt. And then we're picking up the 2 general obligation bonds that we'll be doing the 1028 hearing on next meeting. Pension debt is, again, a little over $3 million. It fluctuates a few $1,000s year to year. The final payment is in January of 2027. We make 2 payments a year. So we're getting closer. And then finally, referendum debt. You can see it has a budget of $1,382,000. That did not change from 2023. I had a couple different calls about when property tax bills came out this year. Why is there a small amount for referendum on my tax bill? I thought that expired. Well, if you recall, in 2014, there was 2 referendums. One was operating. Yes, that expired. That was 13 cents. There was also safety and security, in which we added secure entrances on buildings and put 3M film on glass and did a variety of things. That was just like any other building project. We bonded for that, and there's a payment, and those payments go through 2033. Make sense? Okay. So yes, everyone will still have they live in the district, there's still a small amount, depending on the value of your home, on your tax bill. Historical tax rate, I thought you'd be interested in this to see where we've been. You can see it since 2018 has declined each year. A big piece of that is because the assessed valuation has grown, particularly a lot in the last 2 or 3 years. And then you can see the referendum operating, which is the last line right before the total tax rate. The last year for that was 2021, and it expired then in 22. Okay. And my final slide, rainy day fund, as I like to talk about, there's 2 ways to gain authority to spend rainy day money. You can wait until some event happens and you're in a rush and you have to go through an additional appropriation process, which is kind of like doing a mini budget. Requires board actions, state review, and so forth. Or, as I like to do, I add it into the annual budget process. The appropriation amount is the same number it was last year. We've not spent any money out of rainy day fund, but it gives us an ability to respond quickly if something unexpected occurs. Natural disaster, whatever it might be, roughly equates to one payroll cycle. And we have the opportunity to replenish from tax funds by just that authority is granted by Indiana code. However, the exception is you can't use debt service cash balance to push into rainy day fund. That was a little change because some districts were doing that and the state didn't like it, so they made that rule. Okay. So the big grin on my face, that's the end. We've come to the end of my last budget presentation. Are there any questions I can answer at this point? Or did I bludgeon another audience in there? Well, I appreciate your time and attention.
Hold on, Phil. Is there any questions or comments from our vastly large audience? Nope.
Well, I'm packing them in.
Thank you, Kim.
Kevin,
Thank you.
what areas in the budget have the biggest, are we having the biggest increases as far as,
So education funds, these contracted pieces that I talked about.
what about anything in operations or anything changing as far as that aspect goes?
You know, I kind of across the board, there's kind of this inflation growth. And as Mr. Scott pointed out, there's been adjustments plus and minus based on actual expenditure tracking. But there isn't anything in particular that stands out. And again, you know, the only thing really that we can control locally is what debt looks like. We can be doing projects, and that can and they will give us the money to make our debt payments, and that impacts tax rate. But beyond that, the state's going to work the budget and deliver our budget order, our spending authority, the appropriation authority. And we have to live within that, just like we do at home with our checkbook. So really, that is the philosophy I take. And I've become, maybe a little more jaded over time, because it was this same way in industry, right? We'd spend weeks and weeks and weeks. We'd build these very detailed budget plans, and then they would consolidate those across all the worldwide operating divisions. And then they'd come back and say, Kevin, you need to give us another X. And so whatever that changed to, it broke all of my detail. Now my budget doesn't tie to this very detailed sales plan and manufacturing plan with overhead and labor, materials and R&D, all that stuff. And the state budget is very much like that. Is if you goof and you budget lower than what you could have received as far as spending authority, that's all you're going to get. That's what they're giving. But so every district, in the 20 years I've been doing this, we budget on the high side and advertise that way, and we adopt, and then we give it to them, and they work their magic to adhere to all the state codes and requirements and deliver a budget order back to us. So it's never the budget that we submit.
So when do we anticipate getting the blessed version from the state?
Well, again, that normally is in mid-December. They've been getting better about. It used to be
Months.
mid-February was what the law used to say. They moved it to the end of the year because we are issuing debt. All of the taxing authorities in Elkhart County will have a little bit of a delay. I don't know if I'll see them in December or not, because we won't have amortization schedules for the two debt groups that will be coming on until very late. So once I get those will be the last pieces that they need, and then they can work our budget.
Gotcha.
And so I don't know. I don't know if we'll see it by 12/31 or not. Might be into January. We'll see. Because our game plan on the bonds is sell the bonds mid-November, not Thanksgiving week, the week before, get better response, and then we'll close in mid-December, and so we'll get the funds in mid-December. That's when we'll get all the final paperwork. We'll get the debt service payment schedule that we load in the state gateway software. So,
Kevin, how about talking just a little bit about tax caps and how those work with other taxing units, and how that interplay happens and how it affects the school system?
Tax caps, as I believe you all know, so there are thresholds, right? 1% for residential, 2% for rental properties, agriculture, and 3% cap for industrial property within your district. And it's the combined tax rate of the city of Elkhart, Elkhart schools, library, any other taxing units. It's the combined tax rate. And so with just the school and the city being around $3, you start to see significant tax cap impact in places where the total tax rate is $3 or more. And so that's why we've always seen a fairly significant tax impact. A lot depends on what the blend of your assessed valuation is. If you have a high volume of residential, which years ago when this really became an issue, Franklin Township on the southeast side of Indianapolis had a very high percentage of residential, because their high school and the big football field they built are sitting out in the middle of a residential area. And their tax cap loss wiped out CPF, transportation. They lost all that money. I don't remember how big the number was. And so it caused them to do some crazy things to try to manage. How do you still run buses for kids, and how do you take care of buildings? I know my counterpart, I just talked to my counterpart that had been at Wayne Township on the west side, Ben Davis High School. They have 16,000 kids, and they were losing about $16 million a year. So same situation. When I talk about those funds that were combined into the operations fund, it wipes out a huge piece of that for them. So how do they manage that? Well, they're issuing more debt than we are, so their debt tax rates are much higher than ours because they're issuing debt to do any kind of work in the buildings where we have some dollars to work on projects in buildings when they're not multi-million dollar. But we can find a way to do a $200,000 or $300,000 project. So when it first rolled out, before assessed valuations started going up, Elkhart, I believe, the highest tax cap loss was around $6 million. I don't know if you were here then. In my time here, in 8 years, it's been in that range, very tight range, 3.6 to 3.9. And we find a way to manage our business based on the funds we receive. We're working that checkbook. So, good question.
But if our assessed value is going up, then that's giving us, the tax rate may be going down, but we're getting more money?
Well, if the tax rate remained constant, then you would get more money.
We get more money.
Right. And so that is that's a debate that legislators have about, because if we allow the rate to sink down, would that provide property tax cap relief to all overlapping districts? So you get a little of that money back. So, if you didn't lose dollar for dollar, maybe you gain a little. But that's a philosophy argument, I think, at this point. And it was discussed at this meeting I was at last Friday. So we'll see. A legislator was sitting there and taking a lot of notes. Time will tell.
In addition to Ann's question, you were going to bring in Baker Tilly again and with their nice chart and show us
I have a PowerPoint from them I got last week that
Okay.
I can share next week during the 10/20 here. Basically, the gist of it was we tried to map out the two borrowings we're going to do at the end of the year here for Career Center projects. We're going to do a 5-year payback, so it allows flexibility down the road. And then we planned on 24 through 28, 3 projects a year, because there's lots of things throughout the district we need to do. You've heard us talk about a district this big, we should be doing projects every year because we have so many buildings that are aging and there's needs. And we're also trying to be conscious of where does the feasibility discussion go? What are we going to do with buildings? And so the way we kind of structured, they have a nice chart we can look at. Structured that going forward is to allow flexibility to decide what buildings are we going to work on and what can we knock off. Remember, we can't artificially divide projects, so I can't do like 2 $5 million, $6 million projects at the same building. That's not allowed, but we can work on multiple buildings at the same time. So, thank you. You're welcome. A lot of good questions.
Is there any other discussion? Okay, meeting adjourned. We will take a 15-minute break until 7 to start the board meeting.
Great. Thank you. Thanks.
Usually, I gotta say, usually.
We're not talking about you this time.
Oh.
You were in here early this time, okay. You understand for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I see the crowd has gotten so much bigger. Welcome back for the regular board meeting. We have a, Troy, do you want to
I would love to read the Elkhart Promise. The Elkhart Promise. Every student is known by name, challenged, and supported by highly effective staff, and in partnership with the community, will graduate career, college ready, and life ready.
Thank you. There is an invitation to speak protocol. If you would like to speak, you can fill out the sheet in the back of the paper doors holding up. You'll have 3 minutes to speak at the end of the meeting. After each agenda item, I'll ask for questions or comments from the audience. So you'll have the opportunity to speak also. First on the agenda is the moment of pride from Tony Ingram.
Good evening. Lisa is going to be very excited to be here. She loves lots and lots of attention, if you can't tell.
She looks like it.
So the governing body or the professional body for high ability and gifted students is called the National Association of Gifted Children. And about 3 years ago, when we said we were going to do a strategic focus on high ability in our district, we moved our needle in these last 3 years to the point where we were contacted in April by Ball State University. Ball State for Indiana is probably the center of high ability for K through 12. And they asked us to give some supporting documentation because they were nominating Lisa Ernsberger as the coordinator, the district coordinator of the year with the National Association of Gifted Children. We found out about a week and a half ago that Lisa's going to get that honor in November. She is the national representative as the coordinator, district coordinator for high ability and gifted children. So please join me in applauding her new award she'll receive in November.
I don't want to say anything. There you go.
I have a question, seriously, I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but can you share more about what that is and what you'll be doing as the national representative?
Well, it'll just bring attention to Elkhart Community Schools, so a lot of people will reach out. I've already had a few people reach out as far as consulting of what we're doing here with our clientele and being more of an urban population. I think a lot of focus will be on what we're starting to do with our rising scholars and our emerging bilinguals, but I'm not sure right now what that means, but I think it'll just draw some light to Elkhart Community Schools in a positive direction.
Are there any trends right now, that things that are really working, or new techniques or approaches?
We're really excited here in the district about the rising scholars by looking at our underrepresented populations. So our kids on free and reduced lunch, and then starting this year with our emerging bilinguals. So I'm very excited to see where we go with that. At the middle school level, we've pretty much had about a 95% success rate with the kids we've identified as rising scholars being successful in that pathway. So I'm looking to see that happen with our emerging bilinguals as well.
So I'm sorry, so many questions. For the rising scholars, I had a friend of a friend. Their son, I believe, was chosen to take part in that kind of a program. The parents talked them out of it because they said it was going to be too much pressure. I don't know if it was too much pressure for the parents or for the child. So I can see that might be a challenge for some of these rising scholars. So what would be your approach to kind of get the parents to support it, especially for that group where the parents might not be good with education themselves?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think that will be something our team will focus on, since last year was our first year with exploratory and just seeing how it went and some of the questions that are coming out of that. So I think that's going to be a really good question. Those families are obviously invited to our newly identified night, and I know sometimes that's difficult for families to come to. So I think that's a great question for us to take back to the team when we meet next week, as far as what that looks forward in the next steps as we're looking to add our emerging bilinguals to that programming.
Lisa, can you tell us just a little bit about what the Rising Scholar and Emerging Bilingual programs are for those of us?
Yeah, so so we are, right now we have an emerging, we have an exploratory Rising Scholars at Mary Beck. Mary Beck historically has little to none identified high ability students. So it is a pretty high poverty school. And so instead of looking at the norms across the district, we are using local norms at Mary Beck to identify clusters of kids who need enrichment and a level of depth and complexity in what they're doing. So we have some cluster teachers there working with those kids specifically. And then the social worker meets with that group of kids at Mary Beck to work on some of those characteristics. And like you're saying, a little bit more with first and second grade. So on leadership and friendship and things like that as they're growing and emerging. At the middle school level, then we have it at all 3 middle schools. So those kids are identified much in the same process. We identify high ability students, but the percentages are different. So to be identified as high ability at Elkhart, we use the 95th percentile. But what we know from kids of poverty, when we're looking at about the 77th percentile, those are kids that are emerging within their subgroup as demonstrating characteristics of high ability. So we take that group of students then, and we go to the 6th grade teachers to get some qualitative feedback. And then those teachers complete what's called a HOPE rating scale. And the HOPE is specifically designed for kids on free and reduced lunch to identify those emerging characteristics. So after they've done that, which is basically mirrors our identification process for high ability, they would get a tag as a rising scholar. So their teachers would be alerted that they are rising scholar. Their incoming teachers would be alerted to provide some of those additional supports because they may not have had the opportunities to necessarily be prepared for an honors class. But as I said, those kids have kind of risen to the challenge of being in honors classes, and they've had a great success so far at our middle school. So we're hoping that carries into high school, and some high school kids have reached out to me as far as the early college program to start to look at our rising scholars and identifying those kids as potentially being eligible for the early college program.
Fantastic, thank you.
I have to say, just driving home, Ann and I literally were talking about you with the high ability program, how we needed to know more, talking about the challenge, just the exact topic of how amazing it's moving and challenging the kids and not lowering the bar and letting them know that it doesn't matter, like low income, poverty, bilingual, what it is. If you're identified or even self-identify, you have the opportunity to rise to that challenge. You know, nobody is telling you no or telling you yes, let's go. So like literally I'm laughing, not at, but it's just like amazing that like here, like you come in to do this and speak about it, and we just, so this is a great marketing opportunity. This is like a great storytelling. Put those little ones in front of it, even the ones that are very back that are like, I'm a rising star, I've got a chance. I mean, like it's our marketing boom right there.
Yeah.
So congratulations.
Yeah, we've been very excited. I mean, I think, like I said, we were exploratory last year. Rhiannon Harrison and I have met with the national consultants about how we will include our emerging bilinguals into that. So that is the focus for this year. Each year we have a theme and a focus. So our theme this year is high ability exists in all populations. So we're trying to make sure we mirror that across the board. So just excited as we get started. There's not many schools in Indiana doing that, so there's not a lot of people to lean on right now, but
let us start the trend.
We're all gonna be leaning on
Let's
you.
trend.
That's right.
You know, we no longer tell children that we're gonna lower the bar, lower the expectations, that we're gonna raise it so that they can know that they have the opportunity no matter what. So yeah, congratulations.
well, thank you. And like I've told Tony many times, I thank you for the praise, but the opportunity that the board presented, and starting with Dr. Tallheimer kind of initiating the position and Tony being my boss, and then all the high ability coordinators and all the guiding coalitions that have met over the last 3 years really drove this work forward so quickly. So I'm just blessed with all the people that I've been surrounded by. So thank you.
I have two more comments, Lindsay. One, take your roses while you can. This is a big honor for you. You earned it, so take the praise. It's great. It's great. I know it was a team effort, but you are exceptional at what you do. We appreciate all your hard work, and they wouldn't have just picked anybody for this honor. As we're talking about this, another thing I thought of with that demographic of the rising scholars, the child might be very excited, but their peers are not going to be as excited. So for that demographic, it's a lot more pressure not to be smart because it's not cool to be smart from that demographic. So that might be another area that you might want to focus in on, providing those supports so that those kids know that it's okay to excel and be smart and be authentic who they are. You don't have to be like the other kids.
Yeah, I think that's important to take back as well. What's been very exciting about the kids we've identified, so once they're identified, we have to by law stir them, and they are identified, is some of them have started to reach out and advocate for themselves. So we may have only put them in an honors math class, but they're telling me, I think I'm capable of doing honors and science and social studies and language arts. And so we look at those kids and we talk to their teachers to see, okay, this is what we've got to get them to get them so they're going to be successful in those classes. So I think hopefully peer pressure will swing a little bit the other way, but I hear what you're saying, because in middle school in particular, girls tend to not want to be smart sometimes too, and we deal with that as they start to feel some of the peer pressure of that. So I get what you're saying.
Jeff, did you get both of your questions answered?
I did. Thank you.
All right, is there any other discussion? Thank you, Lindsay. Congratulations again. Next are the consent items. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion?
Yes, we have $1,800 from Feed the Children to use as prizes for our sub and secretary meetings, $10,000 from Phyllis Tubbs for the growth and development for our athletes, and then Jeff and Kimberly Wilbaum, I think it's pronounced, so I'm sorry if it's not, but they donated a Zippy Extreme manual wheelchair, which is amazing. So thank you to each of them and to our community again.
Is there any other discussion? All in favor? Oh, sorry.
I just have a couple questions on the Indiana Learns grant. Get a little bit more.
Who would be able to answer those questions?
Betty Bruce can.
Yes. Bless you.
I printed off.
Bless you, Tony.
Yeah, I printed off some information that was sent to us that I got back when I got back to town late today. So my question is I'm a little confused on how this is going to work, and is this tutoring thing for parents that they're signing up for through the state? Is that during the school day or is that after school? How does this? What are the mechanics of this?
Generally, it is after school.
Okay.
There could be an opportunity for some as far as during a study hall or something of that nature if the teacher is free, but that would be fairly unusual.
Okay, so that's more for study hall. That would be more middle school, high school kids
Yes.
compared to And this is for Pinewood's going to start this, but we don't know yet if other schools are.
No, as I indicated, that will be on the principal's agenda at our next meeting to see whether other elementary schools might be interested in that as well.
Okay.
I had a quick question too. So the funding comes from the state, and there's a criteria they have to meet. I think if I remember correctly, it's live in the state of Indiana, attend a public or charter school, one proficient in English and math, and then on free and reduced lunch.
That's correct.
So take the free and reduced lunch out. What are we doing with the students that meet the other criteria that are not proficient? How are we addressing those needs?
That's exactly what we're working on corporation-wide this year with through our basically through our assessments and our interventions, so that we're working on that with every student who does not succeed as far as passing a particular assessment, that we work with them in terms of what is called Tier 2 to make sure that we're trying to meet their needs. That's not easy for teachers to design additional materials, educational materials, but that's what we're attempting to do and work on this year.
So if this program and this grant is successful, haven't they already done the work for us except for the funding? We would have to come up with the funding and duplicate what they're doing here with this grant?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, if this grant and tutoring is successful to bring up these students, isn't that work done? Can we duplicate that? The only difference is it's not going to be funded by a grant of the state. You would have to come up with the funding.
Yes, that would be accurate in terms of needing for us to come up with funding. And that would be more or less it. In other words, if parents wanted to sign up for it, we provide it to any student, whether it's free or reduced or not.
Correct.
That would be another opportunity to look at in the future. But first, I think we need to see whether this program can be successful.
Fair enough. Yep, I agree. Thank you.
Is there any other discussion? Is there any questions or comments from the audience? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. All right, Kevin, back to you already.
Okay. Good deal. In terms of the financial report this evening, Business Department would like to share that our cash balance at the end of August was $42,649,192.74. This consistently strong cash balance is what's leading to the nice interest income that we talked about earlier this evening. The only item of note that I would point out is on the operations fund page under contracted services. You see that number is up. That's because we made the Beacon payment that we pay twice a year for our use of the Aquatic Center downtown. There's $240,000 in there for the Beacon payment. That concludes my comments on the financial report. Are there any questions? If not, I will move on to insurance. So we look at current month, August 2023 versus 2022. You can see, even though we had not the greatest of months, it wasn't quite as bad as August last year. On a year-to-date basis, you can see that when you combine the UMR runout and the Anthem medical, we've been pretty consistent. There's almost no change year to year. On a year-to-date basis, it's really driven by pharmacy. Pharmacy is significantly up, which translates into higher rebates, and so the rebates up. But total claim experience year over year, year-to-date's up about $180,000. So that concludes my comments on insurance.
Is there any discussion from the board? Any questions or comments from the audience? Thank you, Kevin.
Okay, thank you.
Good evening. Tonight, the business office recommends award of a contract in the amount enumerated in your packet to Midland Engineering of South Bend, Indiana, for roof projects at Elkhart High School, Northside Middle School, and Westside Middle School. The work at Elkhart High School will be a partial re-roof of the original two-story section, while the work at Northside and Westside will be total re-roof projects, completely new roofs. The funding for this project will come from the ESSER 3 funds for operations allocated to Elkhart Community Schools. And because of the tight timeline, which is completion by next September, this work will take place while school is in session. Now, this is normal for us when we do re-roofing projects. So we will work very closely with Midland to make sure that we avoid testing dates and any other dates of concern with the schools.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion from the board?
I do have one question. Does that include the gym at Northside?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yep, the entire school. included.
Tony, with these three projects, where are we in the roof life cycle? Are these projects that are overdue, or are they on time where they should be? Are we doing it preventatively because we have the ESSER funds available?
The work at Elkhart High School, sorry, I still tend to refer to it as Memorial, I've been here long enough, is overdue. That roof that we're replacing is 31 years old. Our life expectancy on a membrane roof is 20 years. We've had extremely good luck, but we are concerned as we see an uptick in the number of repair work orders that it's just time, and this was a great opportunity to do it. West Side is actually only 21 years old, so it's barely over the life expectancy. However, it is the school that we have the most issues with right now. And North Side, we've had issues with the gym for several years. You may remember, folks may remember that we had a fairly significant leak on the second floor there a few years ago, and we had to replace some of the original floor on the second floor, thankfully not the main floor. We have cobbled it together over the years, and this just presents a great opportunity to protect that asset as well.
Thank you.
Is there any other discussion?
There is, because of the short turnaround, because of the funding, I know there was some discussion that did we get assurances both from a labor perspective and a materials perspective that they were able to complete these in that time frame. And I know there's some discussion about maybe contractually putting liquidated damages clause in there if they didn't. So it's kind of a two-part question. Did we get assurances, and then contractually did we account for the money?
We do have assurances. We have not finalized the contract yet. We certainly can look at liquidated damages. In my experience with public work, it's difficult at times to do that, especially with schools, but it doesn't mean we can't try it.
I would just say with the funding being kind of an extraordinary circumstance here, and the cost, if the timing isn't met, it'd certainly be worth a conversation.
Absolutely. One of the reasons that we went with this method, with the TIPS method for project procurement, is that it allowed us to go out and look within the state purchasing group that we're part of. We used it for Rice Field, and we've used it for technology purchases in the past, but we were able to look at companies that were large enough to be able to accommodate this size of project. Midland is one of the largest roofing companies around, so it actually works out very well in our favor. But your point is well taken, and we have discussed it, that there's always something that could happen. Sure. So they're waiting for my phone call tonight, if you approve this, and they're going to get started with their own purchasing and their labor. Okay. They're hopefully, ready to go as we think they are.
Very good. Thank you.
We vote yes, but that doesn't get answered. That it doesn't really matter, because once we vote on it, that's kind of null and void, basically.
But I think, don't you still have to negotiate?
No.
Or
Well,
is this it?
we have to finalize the contract language. Typically, we use the AIA documents for that language, but we have discussed in the past using a different document. This is the gamble with any project, to be perfectly honest, is that once you approve it, we're basing the contract on their agreement to our project terms. So we move forward, we give them that expectation, and we do everything we can to make sure that they meet that expectation.
And that's why I asked, has there been conversations, and you said, okay.
And what is the proposed timeline, Tony?
So we have given them August 31st, so that gives us a little bit extra time going into September.
Is there any other discussion? Any questions or comments from the audience? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed.
Great, thank you.
Dr. Staley?
Yes, you've been given this proposal for a new course at high school, 1084 digital media. And you have the description of that as far as the line that I particularly like: analyze local, national, and global media through the lens of law, ethics, and social responsibility. And that's part of this course. And as you know, it would not be taught until the second semester of 2025, if it's approved.
there any discussion? Or did that have a vote?
We have to motion.
It's just on
Yeah,
there.
we have to motion.
It's just on there.
No, it's on
for-
the floor. Oh, it's on the floor.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just have a quick question, that maybe it says in that paragraph right after that kind of sentence you read, for the second credit, students continue to develop media production skills in addition to continuing critical media analysis. What's the second credit?
That would mean another semester.
So is this a two semester class or a one semester, or is it two different classes?
It's two, my understanding is it's one class, but it could be taught in 2 semesters.
Okay.
But I will check on that to make sure and report back to you next time.
Oh, that's fine. I just didn't know the way it's worded, if there's another class
Right.
that it goes to after this, so, okay.
Because that would need to be your approval as well.
Well, yeah, and then just for clarification's
Yes.
sake, that would be great. Thank you.
This is an interesting thing too, because again, today, we just had a wonderful marketing is our jam type, session. And one of the things they talked about was storytelling, which is inside of this, and really utilizing your high school students that are focusing on journalism to be the storytellers that create like a newspaper, create stories, create videos, whatever. And this would tie kind of into that curriculum right there.
Yes, it would.
So
Yes, it
yeah,
would.
that's another thing that just felt right now.
Yes.
Is there any other discussion?
Thanks.
Any questions or comments from the audience? Thank you, Dr. Stone. Dr. Thorne, you have a short list tonight.
I have a very short list tonight, but we'll see what we can do to juice that up for you in the future. Tonight, the administration is presenting for board review and seeking board approval of proposed revisions to the compensation plan for substitute teachers. The proposed revisions address a number of different issues. The first is one that would allow the retired teacher's rate to be paid to any retired teacher, regardless of where the teacher taught in either an Indiana public school or a public school in another state. In addition to this change, the administration is seeking authorization to increase compensation for substitute teachers who possess an Indiana license but who might not have retired from a school district yet. Establishes a formal process for determining whether a teacher holds the qualifications to grade and write lesson plans, and specifically links the compensation plan for substitute teachers who accept a long-term assignment to the base salary for teachers with a bachelor's or master's degree, and finally establishes a rate of pay for substitute teachers who attend professional development activities. This is one of the things that I think differentiates Elkhart from a lot of other school districts, is the fact that we provide ongoing professional development opportunities for our substitutes. So we want to get that in place. We believe that these changes will cause a further expansion of our substitute teacher pool, and therefore requesting a waiver of second reading.
Is there a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Doug, I can tell you at the ISBA conference, more than a handful of people mentioned something to me about our substitute teacher pay and how they were considering coming here to sub because of that. So
great. And that's really what is driving these changes, and what we can continue to do to expand our substitute teacher pool. There happens to be a district just across the line that's been trying to take our teachers away from us. We thought we might want to put up a couple of signs up in Constantine.
is there any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passed.
Thank you.
Or do we have anything from the audience? Mark, do you have anything?
Remind the board that our next regular meeting is October the 10th.
Is there anything from the board?
Yeah, I've got something. They're having, we're having a parent university on October 3rd at Roosevelt from 6:15 to 8. Called Navigating the Digital Frontier is the topic. And they're going to be talking about digital literacy, online safety with kids, with parents, tutorials for parents on PowerSchool, Seesaw, Canvas. And I think if you need information, call Student Services. They have more information about it. I just want to highlight that there's a parent university next week. Yeah, so check, I think it's on the website as well.
Is there anything else from the board? I just want to say how excited I am that that cell tower got denied. I want to thank all of the parents and families and anybody from the community that spoke out, that supported the district. We want to do everything we can to keep our students safe. So I'm really excited that that tower will not be going up by one of our schools.
Yet, just say that in the event that they would attempt to negate our hard work and our hopefulness, that we come back even stronger and with much more information in the event that that would be something that might possibly hopefully not happen. Not to be a Debbie Downer, but just to be prepared. I just want to be prepared in the event that we have to work a little bit harder again.
Kelly, killing my high notes.
Sorry.
Sorry.
Sorry, I
Needed a jerk.
I'm sorry. I mean, I just want us to be prepared in the event that we have to be prepared.
Let's just celebrate this one victory today.
It was a victory. It is a victory.
It stays that way.
Let's just keep it
When
that
she
way.
starts with